One of the most important writings of Abdul Baha is The Secret of Divine Civilization. I'll begin with sharing some historical background on the book and then briefly discuss its content and a few of its key topics. Let me begin by saying that we have over 38,000 recorded writings of Abdul Baha, ranging from brief personal letters such as a note to his wife Munira Khanum, written during his travels to America about a family matter, to more extensive works like The Secret of Divine Civilization, which spans about 150 pages, along with many other significant writings. Generally speaking, Abdul Baha's writings can be divided into two major periods. The first includes everything he wrote during the lifetime of his father Baha'u'llah, that is up to 1892. The second covers the period from 1892 until his own passing in 1921. All of his early writings were composed under Baha'u'llah's guidance. These range from his well-known commentary on the Islamic Hadith, I was a hidden treasure, written when he was a teenager during the Baghdad period, to The Secret of Divine Civilization, which he wrote at the age of 31 while living in Akka. This book was completed in 1875 in Akka, roughly 30 years before the start of the Iranian constitutional revolution, which in itself is a rich topic. The relationship of Baha'is to that revolution is particularly fascinating, especially considering that Abdul Baha wrote nearly 200 tablets in a single year to guide the Baha'is through that turbulent time. I hope we'll have the chance to explore that topic in the future as well. Out of the 38,000 writings of Abdul Baha, only two were written and published anonymously. One is The Secret of Divine Civilization in 1875, as I said, and the other one is a traveler's narrative written around 1886. It's important to note that both of these works were composed during the lifetime of Baha'u'llah and were written at his instructions. Abdul Baha himself explains in The Secret of Divine Civilization why he chose to write the book anonymously. He states that he did not want his name to become a barrier for readers, preventing them from engaging with and understanding the content, due to the strong prejudice that existed in Iran at the time. Many people would have refused to even touch the book had they known it was written by him. When the book was first published anonymously, it quickly gained popularity throughout Iran, especially among the intellectuals of the time. Its influence continued to grow until people discovered that the true author was Abdul Baha. Once it became known that he had written the book, the reaction changed dramatically. People from all walks of life became too afraid to even mention reading it. Such was the depth of prejudice against Abdul Baha and the Baha'i faith. When Abdul Baha wrote this book in 1875, the world population was approximately 1.4 billion people, while Iran population was around 9 to 10 million. At that time, there were perhaps close to 200,000 Baha'is worldwide. Before diving into the book's content, let's take a moment to consider the state of Iran during the time it was published and distributed. It's worth noting that much of that what we hear about Iran's past glory refers to the period before the arrival of Islam in the country. The decline of Iran began after the Muslim Arab invasion, which lasted about 20 years. That invasion, a major historical event in itself, led to the forced imposition of Islam, specifically the Sunni branch, on Persian society. This marked the beginning of a significant cultural and intellectual decline. Later, during the Safavid dynasty, the situation worsened. The official religion of Iran was forcibly changed from Sunni Islam to Shia Islam. The Safavids went as far as importing Shia clerics from other regions such as Iraq to promote Shiism in Iran and to suppress Sunni influence. This religious upheaval contributed further to Iran's cultural and social decline. Iran's decline took an even sharper turn at the start of the 19th century, beginning with Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, the founder of Qajar dynasty, which ruled for about 140 years. The most difficult and damaging period of that dynasty was under the reign of Nasruddin Shah, who ruled for nearly 50 years. During his rule, Iran reached an all-time low in nearly every aspect, socially, politically, and economically, to mention a few. Although Nader Shah had previously attempted to reduce the influence of the Shia clergy, he was ultimately unsuccessful, and the clergy power continued to grow during this period. This was the state of Iran when The Secret of Divine Civilization was written. In essence, the book was a call for transformation, a vision to uplift the country and introduce principles of modernity. It was not just a guide for Iran, but also a model of progress that could be applied universally. In other words, this book is about modernity and the core principles that support it. Of course, there were traces of modernity in 19th century Iran. For example, the 3 trips that Nasruddin Shah, the king of Iran, made to Europe. These trips were organized by Mirza Hussein Khan Mushir-ud-Dawleh, one of the Shah's officials and a well-known modernist and intellectual of the time. The Shah's first trip to Europe was 1873, and the second was in 1878 or 1879. As I mentioned earlier, The Secret of Divine Civilization was written in 1875. So we can see that Abdul Baha wrote this book during a period when conversations about modernity were beginning to take place in Iran. The Shah's third trip to Europe came about 10 years later, about 1889. Interestingly, the Shah had a strong interest in recording his own memoirs. He would often write a few lines himself, but mostly dictated them to his scribes. I've read parts of these memoirs, and to be honest, some of what he focused on during his travels is quite shocking, too embarrassing to even repeat them here. Instead of seeking knowledge, inspiration, or progressive ideas, basically from the West, to bring back and implement them in Iran, he was mostly preoccupied with personal pleasures. He was a womanizer, and his priorities has nothing to do with the welfare or advancement of his country. In short, the outcome of his travels can be summed up in one word: zero. This is especially striking when we consider that around the same time the Emperor of Japan was also traveling to Europe, but with a completely different purpose. His goal was to learn from the West and bring those ideas back to modernize and strengthen Japan. Both leaders returned to their countries, one to Iran, the other to Japan, but with vastly different results. Let's look at the outcome of these two leaders' travels. First, the Emperor of Japan, he took a strategic and visionary approach. He spent three groups he sent three groups to Europe, each with a specific purpose. One group studied the European education systems. The second examined the constitutions of various European countries. And the third focused on learning about the industrial knowledge and professions. The emperor carefully reviewed the reports from all three groups and acted on them accordingly. He recognized that education was the foundation of progress. As a result, he divided Japan into 8 regions, and in each region, he established 300 primary schools, 30 high schools, and one university. Now let's look at the outcome of Nasr ad-Din Shah's trip. During his visit to London, he attended a show at the Royal Albert Hall and was impressed by the performers' short skirts. When he returned to Iran, he asked all 84 of his wives in the royal harem to adopt the same style. The second major outcome was the construction of the Takiye Dowlati, a government-sponsored venue for Taziye, a type of religious miracle play. And finally, as a souvenir, he brought back a slide from Europe. He had it installed in his harem and asked all his wives to sit at the bottom so he could slide down and embrace them. So you can clearly see the stark constant between the mentalities, priorities, and the result of these two leaders' journeys to Europe. So, and this, friends, was the state of Iran when the secret of divine civilization was written. It was during this period of Iran's decline that the Babi faith first emerged, followed shortly after by the birth of the Baha'i faith. It's also important to note that to truly understand the Baha'i faith and especially Abdul Baha's Secret of Divine Civilization, we need to consider two territories and cultures side by side. One, Persian culture, and the other one, the culture of Ottoman Empire. Examining both helps provide a fuller context for the faith and this significant work. Both of these regions, Iran and Ottoman Empire, had their own thinkers, reformers, and intellectuals. In Iran, figures like Amir Kabir and Mirza Hussein Khan Mushir-ud-Dawleh played a significant role in to reform different movements. Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, several influential thinkers emerged, some of whom were friends of the Baha'i faith, while others were critics. I will not go to any details here, but it's worth remembering that Baha'u'llah refers to himself as the world reformer, Musleh Alam, in his writings, and Abdul Baha was also widely regarded as a reformer. The Baha'i teachings were revolutionary in both the East and the West, aiming to transform thought, culture, and societies. Principles such as the equality of men and women, or global peace and justice, were radical at that time. Many still believed that war was necessary for survival. So the idea of world peace was truly under groundbreaking, basically. I don't go to any details here for this topic, but I think that I should share a few words about modernity. The concept of modernity first emerged in the West, evolving gradually through several phases and growing more vibrant over time. Eventually, it began to make its way to Iran, but at a much slower pace. This delay was not because the West was unwilling to share the ideas of modernity, but rather because religious leaders, especially the mullahs, tried to stop it. To understand this better, we should remember that even Europe during the 16th century was deeply influenced by superstition. For example, there was a time when the Pope claimed to be selling land in heaven, and many people actually believed him and bought these so called heavenly plots. What eventually put an end to these kinds of superstition was the rise of modern thoughts, sparked in part by the publication of books and spread of literacy. And as people began to read, learn, and think for themselves, superstition gradually lost its grip. This movement laid the foundation for the Renaissance in Europe and marked the beginning of modernity as we know it. About 300 to 400 years later, towards the end of the 19th century, modernity began to influence Judaism as well. Jewish communities also began reading, questioning, and trying to free themselves from long held superstitions. Islam also has been affected by superstition, something that would take hours to fully explore. For instance, beliefs like anyone who cries will have their sins forgiven is still dominant. And sorrow and crying are often emphasized in some Islamic traditions, but in the Baha'i faith places a strong emphasis on joy and happiness as virtues. Modernity challenged these patterns by encouraging people to think independently. Of course, this process unfolded differently in different societies at different times and places. That's why it's essential to understand that modernization is not a single event, it is a continuous and dynamic process. Even during Shakespeare's time, in the 17th century, modernity clashed with the church. People began insisting on the right to think for themselves, to base their decisions on reason and personal undertaking rather than waiting for religious authorities to tell them what to do, So, in essence, modernity or tajaddud is about freeing the mind. It means moving beyond the control of mullahs, priests, popes, or any religious authority and embracing the ability to read, think, and understand the world for themselves. The discussion of modernity or tajaddud, as it's called in Persian, is one of the most significant topics of our time. It touches every aspect of life: cultural, political, economic, artistic, etc., etc. And this is not just an issue for the East or for Iran in particular, it's a global concern. When we talk about modernization, we are referring to a worldwide transformation, and it is not confined to any one country or region. The most important point to understand about modernity is that it is a process, not an event. It's not something that begins with a specific moment in time or ends with another. While it may emerge in a certain place or be sparked by certain developments, it does not have a fixed end point. Modernity is an evolving process, an ongoing journey that parallels the growth and maturation of humanity itself. And just as the human mind requires constant renewal and adaptation through new information and insight, modernity requires a continuous commitment to learning and change. That's why one of our core personal responsibilities is to seek knowledge. In fact, modernity and knowledge are like two essential pillars that hold up a healthy, forward moving society. Let me share an analogy. Imagine that real change is like a bicycle. For that bicycle to move forward and reach its destination, it needs two functioning wheels. One wheel is modernity, and the other one is knowledge, or agahi in Persian. Each wheel depends on the other. If one is missing or not working, the bicycle cannot move forward. Now, when I say knowledge, I don't just mean academic or technical knowledge. First and foremost, I refer to self knowledge, understanding who we are, where we come from, why we were created, and where we stand in our journey. Then comes knowledge of the world, of science, of technology, religion, and spirituality. Two key questions can guide us in this process. Why are we here? And what happens after this life? These are just examples, but they open the door to deeper reflections and growth. In short, the path of modernity and the pursuit of knowledge go hand in hand. They are not only necessary for the progress of society, but for the evolution of each of us as individuals. I would like also to add an important point to this discussion, and that is that the word modernity or tajaddud in Persian is actually a relatively new term. In 19th century Iran, different words were used to express the same concept, like noavari, innovations, or no talabi, the desire for the new. These terms reflected similar ideas and were commonly used during the time of Iranian constitutional revolution, which took place between 1906 and 1911. In fact, the central topic of the constitutional revolution was modernity itself. Intellectuals and reformers of the time were demanding that society be governed according to modern laws and principles. While that is a separate topic on its own, it's deeply connected to this discussion about the secret of divine civilization and the broader movement toward reform and progress in Iran. Also, I should add that the beginnings of modernity in the West, especially in Europe, can be traced back to the 11th and 12th centuries. During this time, we start to see early signs of modern thoughts taking shape. The University of Paris became a major center for intellectual development and modernist thinking. Now, having shared all of that background, let's turn our attention to this important book, The Secret of Divine Civilization. This book was not officially published until 7 years later, in 1882, and that first publication took place in India. The publisher was Mr. Afnan, a relative of the Bab, who had moved to India and established a publishing business to support himself and to help spread the Baha'i teachings through printed materials. The first Baha'i book he published was the Book of Certitude, Kitab-e Iran, in 1881. followed by the Kitab Aqdas, and then the Secret of Divine Civilization. Interestingly, when this book was first published, it did not bear the title The Secret of Divine Civilization. Instead, it appeared under a different name, Asrarul Qiybiye Lasbab al Madaniye. It means roughly the mysterious secrets of the causes of civilization. Later on, The Secret of Divine Civilization was translated into English by Marzieh Gale, the daughter of Ali Quli Khan, a prolific translator and a Stanford graduate who later studied English literature at UC Berkeley. Marzieh Gale met Abdul Baha during his travels to the West and was also had the honor of meeting Shoghi Effendi. She was deeply devoted to both of them, and it was Shoghi Effendi who encouraged her to take on translation work. Over the years, she translated several key Baha'i writings, including the Seven Valleys, the Four Valleys, Some Answered Questions, and the appendix of the Kitab Aqdas, and many other tablets. The Secret of Divine Civilization was translated in consultation with her father, Ali Quli Khan. You can learn more about her life and contributions in the Encyclopedia Iranica. Now, let's focus on the content of this important book and take a closer look at what Abdul Baha writes. If you ask me to describe this book in one word, I would say it is about modernity. Now, let me explain why. Abdul Baha's purpose in writing this book was to guide the people of Iran and people everywhere toward progress by encouraging a transformation in thoughts, belief, and the way of life. His aim was a profound reform through intellectual awakening. At its core, Abdul Baha emphasizes that real change must begin with a change in mindset. He calls for a shift in thinking that is based on reason and grounded in intellect and wisdom, and also is dynamic, rather than tied to outdated traditions and customs of the past. This reminds me of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who was also a progressive thinker. He once argued that the Constitution should be reviewed and revised every 19 years, and each generation should have the freedom to shape its own society, and change must be responsive to the needs of the time. However, Abdul Baha's vision of modernity goes beyond just updating laws or embracing new teachings. He expands the concept to include both material and spiritual progress. In Abdul Baha's view, modernity is like a great structure supported by two essential columns. One, moral and spiritual principle, the other one, science and technology. Both are necessary. A truly progressive and balanced society must be built on both foundations. You cannot have one without the other. Another key theme in this book is the importance of understanding history. Abdul Baha asks readers to study the history of Iran in order to recognize how far the country had fallen from its former glory before the advent of Islam to the depth of decline it had reached by the 19th century. In this book, Abdul Baha outlines the main reasons behind Iran's decline and the obstacles to its progress. These can be summarized in six key points. One, lack of clear and true ideology. Two, absence of a genuine reform minded leader. Three, lack of functioning and a just political system. Four, lack of education and educated individuals capable of reforming systems in alignment with the needs of the time. Five, lack of awareness about the correct path and direction for national advancement. Six, spreading corruptions that serves as a major barrier to progress, not only in Iran, but in any country, East or West. Another central topic in the secret of divine civilization, and one that sets Abdul Baha apart from many other reformers, is his critique of Western culture. While many praised the West for its advancements, Abdul Baha pointed out that much of Western culture is superficial and overly materialistic. This was also a major topic in his talks during his travels in America. While he strongly encouraged the adaptation of certain Western achievements, such as science and technology, he also warned against blindly imitating the materialism and superficial values of Western society. In his view, true happiness and lasting fulfillment come not from material progress alone, but from spiritual growth and connection to God. In this book, Abdul Baha makes it clear: without updated spiritual and moral values, the world will never attain lasting happiness. He believed that real progress requires more than science and politics. It demands a foundation rooted in ethics, unity, and compassion. In The Secret of Divine Civilization, Abdul Baha does not criticize or belittle political or religious leaders. Rather, he calls upon them to uphold the highest standards of morality and spiritual principles. He emphasizes that qualities like honesty, integrity, and purity of intention are non negotiable prerequisites for meaningful reform, regardless of whether that reform is in the East or in the West. He says that bribery is unacceptable and lying is never justified under any circumstances. A significant portion of the book is dedicated to promoting these high moral and spiritual values that Abdul Baha considers essential for any real progress. Abdul Baha, in The Secret of Divine Civilization, emphasizes four key principles to make real change in the society. One, leaders must strive for both material and spiritual insight, with pure intention at the heart of their consultation. Two, leaders must defend and promote true religion in its pure and compassionate form. This does not mean performing rituals or focusing solely on outward practices. Rather, leaders must help people understand the spiritual essence of religion, its message of love, justice, equality, and compassion. Abdul Baha writes in this book that when religion is practiced in its true form, it uplifts society and fosters peace. 3. he says leaders must overcome materialistic desires and ego driven motives. Only by doing so, the leaders can become instruments of justice and catalysts for progress. If leaders are consumed by personal gain, they will never be able to genuinely serve the public good. 4. Leaders must follow divine and spiritual laws. These spiritual principles form the true foundation of a divine civilization. Without them, material advancement alone is hollow and unsustainable. He says that lasting peace and justice can only be built on spiritual truths. In summary, Abdul Baha offers not just a vision for change, but a blueprint rooted in ethics, humility, and faith. His message is just as relevant today as it was over 150 years ago when he wrote this book. Abdul Baha also strongly advocates in this book for the globalization of information. He emphasizes that any knowledge or idea that can benefit humanity should be shared freely, regardless of where it came from. It could come from the West and benefit the East, or vice versa. What matters is the benefit it brings to all people. This was a bold statement at the time, especially because many Muslim religious leaders were strongly opposed to this idea. They pushed back against it, believing that knowledge from the West should be rejected. But Abdul Baha argued that we are now living in a global society and that all nations and cultures should learn from one another. So globalization is one of the key features of modernity that Abdul Baha promotes in this book. Another point is consultation, a groundbreaking concept that Baha'u'llah introduced for the first time in his writings. In fact, modern democracy itself can be seen as an outgrowth of the kind of consultation and especially decision making that Abdul Baha discusses in this book. He reminds us that each individual has the capacity to think, to reason, and to decide for themselves. We don't need religious leaders, whether local or national or international, to think for us. The foundation of a healthy society is consultation. That is why the Baha'i community is built around local and national assemblies. This approach honors each person's voice and promotes unity through shared decision making. We must also remember this, that modernity without spirituality leads us to the situation that we are witnessing in the world today. Without a deep, authentic spiritual foundation, no society, no matter how advanced, can survive. But the spiritualization that Abdul Baha speaks of is entirely different. It is not about using religion as an end in itself, but as a means, a tool for true transformation. In the Baha'i faith, spiritualization carries a new and profound meaning. It's about upholding moral principles, nurturing the soul, and transforming society from within. And that leads to this truth that moral principles are everything. Education is everything. Abdul Baha wrote this book exactly 150 years ago. Yet its message feels as fresh and relevant as if he wrote it today. The topics he addresses: modernity, justice, governance, morality, consultation, and spirituality are the exact issues the world is struggling with today. He warns that if we try to implement democracy without an updated spiritual foundation, we will not see real change anywhere in the world. In fact, the situation may grow even worse. Just look around, from the richest countries to the poorest, and you will see what is missing: the spiritual element. That is the missing piece of the puzzle. When Abdul Baha speaks of a new world order, he means a world that is truly new, not only in structure, but in spirit. A global order, grounded not just in laws or policies, but in spiritual principles. This is the vision of the secret of divine civilization. Let's now reflect on one of the central topics of this book, which is education. In the secret of divine civilization, Abdul Baha places a lot of importance on education, not only spiritual education, which he sees as the foundation of the world order he envisions, but also education in the sciences, technology, and trade, whether from the East or the West. He emphasized that education is so vital that he even planned to write a second volume of this book dedicated entirely to the topic of education. That alone tells us how central education is to the progress of individuals and societies. In summary, the secret of divine civilization is a rich, multi-dimensional book. Looking at it from different angles, we find that it is more than just a political or social treatise. It is a roadmap for cultural, spiritual, and intellectual reform. From a bird's eye view, Abdul Baha addresses two dominant perspectives that existed in Iran and to some extent still exist in the world. One, the religious traditionalists who believed Iran was falling behind because it was not strictly following Islamic law. Their solution: reject all Western ideas and advances and return entirely to a system based on Islamic laws as it was 1,400 years ago. In short, they opposed modernity altogether. And two, the secular intellectuals who believed the exact opposite. They argued that Islam itself was the problem. They believed that in order to progress, Iran needed to abandon religion altogether and fully adopt Western models of modernization. But Abdul Baha in this book offers a third, completely different vision. He explains that modernity and religion are not in conflict and never have been in conflict. In fact, he argues that true Islam was one of the earliest promoters of modern thought. Islam, in its pure and original form, served as a powerful engine for scientific and moral advancement. What we often see today, however, is not true Islam, but rather distorted interpretations shaped by religious authorities over time. Abdul Baha emphasizes that we must learn from the technological and scientific advancements of the West, but at the same time, we must not imitate its moral decline. This was a key topic in many of his talks during his travels in the West. In his view, pure Islam, pure Christianity, pure Judaism, and all the great world religions share the same foundation: unity, justice, love, and human potential. He reminds us that we are all born with the potential to become truly human, and that education, especially spiritual education, is the key to unlocking that potential. So the bottom line is this book is a call for a new renaissance, a revival of both spirituality and learning. And its core message can be summed up in three words: education, education, education. But not just any education, a spiritual education.